not going to really care about what he did to Andrea Constand, and I use that loosely because, of course, they care. But what I'm saying is, to the extent of they're going to say, listen, this guy, this is what he does. Since it is what he does, ergo, he did this, as opposed to evaluating what specifically he did in this specific case at that specific time on that specific evening on that specific day. So that's why the judge has a real hard decision to make in terms of whether you allow in other evidence or whether you keep it out and make the case about what it's about. So that's, that I think is going to be very, very big in the case.
And one final thing, the attorney for Cosby brought up the point that there was a commercial allegedly, and they said this man refused to prosecute Bill Cosby in 2004, 2005. Will that be allowed into evidence? Will Mrs. Presley be allowed to argue, or whoever is representing at that time, that this prosecutor, basically came in here and used Bill Cosby's name to, be in office, essentially?
Okay, so let's talk about that for 1 minute. And what we should talk about is the political overtones of this prosecution. And I say that objectively. I think there's certainly politics played into this. And why do I say that? During the election for the prosecutor of that jurisdiction, clearly the former prosecutor in 2005 made a decision not to prosecute Cosby. That decision, in making it, he was of the view that there was not sufficient evidence to move forward. During the election, where that former prosecutor and this prosecutor, Mr. Steele, when they were having that election, there were commercials about Bill Cosby. And there were commercials saying, you know what, this guy thought that Cosby didn't do it. He thinks the victim is lying. I think that if I get elected, we should reopen the case and we should hold Cosby accountable. So clearly, Cosby was a campaign theme, a campaign issue, and certainly played very prominently in what the people of that community felt about Cosby and his shenanigans. So the prosecutor essentially made a promise, Mr. Steele, that if I get elected, I'm going after Cosby. He got elected, he's going after Cosby. And so there's no question that politics played a major role in his decision to go after Cosby. But none of that's admissible in front of a jury. The jury's not going to hear about a campaign, about politics, about Cosby being a political issue, about the new DA promising to go after him. None of that's relevant. But let me tell you why it's important. It's important because having that discussion, if you're on Cosby's defense team, about the politics behind this has a lot to do with the jury pool you're getting. And so if you're on the Cosby team and you're saying, hey, this is a political prosecution, the new DA Steele said he was going to go after him, this is unfair, it's improper, the former DA found there was no sufficient evidence, it goes to whether you get a pool that is objective or a pool that's tainted. And make no mistake about it, we are in the day of social media, we are in the day of 24-hour cable TV, we are in the day of no matter where you live, what you do tonight is going to be on the news tomorrow. And so if you can level the playing field as a defense attorney by arguing political prosecution, where the prosecutor is arguing he's guilty, he's a serial adulterer, he does this all the time, he's no good, this is his way with women, I think you level the playing field so you could potentially have a jury pool who gets both sides of the story. And they're sitting there not knowing any evidence yet, not having heard from one witness yet, but one part of the jury pool may be saying, hey, is this political? And the other part may be saying, hey, Cosby probably did this. But yet you can glean from that a fair and impartial jury that will ultimately base their decision on the facts, on the issues that are brought out in the courtroom and that are not, brought out anywhere else. And so I think that's where it's going to play big, and that's why Cosby's people are reminding everyone about what happened during the election of the current prosecutor.
Interesting. We will definitely keep our eyes on this case, which will be very interesting. Okay, the next case that I want to talk about is the Porter, Freddie Gray case, but I want to remind the fans We have just a little bit time left, so if you want to call, dial up 347-857-2950. You'll get one question in, and we'll get to the questions right after we talk about Freddie Gray. And here is the clip of the latest on Freddie Gray.
Latest twist in the Freddie Gray case. As promised, this morning, Officer William Porter's lawyers filed an injunction to stop his testimony against fellow officers charged in Gray's death. WJZ is following every development from Baltimore to Annapolis and how this also impacts Officer Cesar Goodson, who heads to trial Monday. WJZ investigator Mike Halgren is live. He has obtained that injunction just filed in the Court of Special Appeal. Mike.
Lynn, good afternoon. It is roughly 39 pages. It lays out that argument for why Officer Porter should not have to testify. It will be considered by a panel of judges who may call a hearing on it. WJZ was in Annapolis this morning, where Officer William Porter and his defense team filed an injunction before the Court of Special Appeals. They want that court to immediately overturn Judge Barry Williams' ruling that Porter be forced to testify against Officer Cesar Goodson, Jr. in his trial that starts next week. Defense attorney and former prosecutor Warren Alperstein has been following the case.
And what's supposed to happen is that within a very short period of time, and it should be within days, there'll be a hearing on it for the temporary injunctive relief.
Judge Williams admitted in court yesterday he was in uncharted territory for his unprecedented ruling. It's unprecedented because Porter still faces a retrial and possible federal prosecution. Porter said in court under oath that he planned to plead the Fifth, his constitutional right to avoid self-incrimination. Baltimore City prosecutors argued they would give him a limited type of immunity, where his new testimony could not be used against him. But it does not protect against federal prosecution. And the judge warned if Porter takes the stand and testifies to something new or conflicting, it could jeopardize his retrial. Yet the judge is compelling Porter to testify anyway, demanding that he not assert his Fifth Amendment rights.
In the annals of jurisprudence in Maryland, there's never been a case such as this where a defendant who's yet to go to trial in his case is required to testify in a way that could incriminate him or herself.
Porter's appeal could have a huge impact on Officer Goodson's trial, on strategy and timing, perhaps halting it altogether. And Porter was supposed to be one of the first witnesses in the Goodson trial, possibly testifying as early as next week. If Porter does not testify, he faces jail time. Reporting live, Mike Halgren, WJZ Eyewitness News.
Mike, thank you, and stay with WJZ for the latest on the trial of Officer Cesar Goodson.
Joey Jackson, your thoughts on the latest with the new trial with Freddie Gray?
Well, I just think it's an incredible legal development, and let's just talk about why Porter's testimony would be significant and what this whole immunity issue means, listeners. Number one, remember Porter went to trial. The jury hung, that is, they were not able to draw a conclusion as to guilt or innocence on his charges. But why do the prosecutors want him to testify so badly against Goodson and against Alicia White, the sergeant? The reason for that is because remember what Porter said. Goodson is the driver. He is now going on trial, which is supposed to start Monday, for depraved heart murder. In the trial of Porter, who took the stand in his own defense, said, A, I told Goodson, the driver, about Freddie Gray's condition. Okay? So now you have basically Porter, an officer, saying that he told the driver Goodson about Freddie Gray's condition. That gets the prosecutor in Goodson's trial to allow the jury to know that Goodson was on notice of Freddie Gray's condition and did nothing about it. It also gets in Sergeant Alicia White's trial, which is forthcoming. He also says that as Porter that he told her about the condition. Now remember, the driver of the van is the ultimate person who's responsible for the passenger. And so Goodson, knowing that Freddie Gray was injured, not only didn't do anything to help Freddie Gray, but he stopped, knowing Freddie Gray, again, was in dire straits, is the argument by the prosecutor, to pick up another passenger. Meanwhile, Freddie Gray's dying, and Goodson is going and picking up other prisoners. What? Are you kidding? So they want that testimony because they feel it will be compelling to the issue of depravity, meaning that Freddie Gray was dying and Officer Goodson knew it and did nothing about it. How inhumane can you be? That's the prosecution's argument. So that's why they want the testimony of Porter. Now, the legal issue of immunity. Look, the fact is that Porter is facing a retrial. And as a person facing a retrial, should he not be entitled not to testify? He has a right against self-incrimination. But prosecution in offering him immunity is not saying we're going to drop charges against you. They're not what's called transactional immunity, saying we're going to forget anything and everything you did. We just want you to testify. We're not going to retry you. Don't worry about it. Forget about your trial. We're not having it. They're not saying that. The prosecution wants his cake, and they want to eat it too. They're saying, well, we're going to try you again in June, but what we're going to do is we're going to offer you what's called use and derivative immunity. So whatever you say during this trial, we're just not going to use against you in your retrial, but we want you to testify anyway. So the argument is he's saying, well, what about my Fifth Amendment right against self-incrimination? I don't have to testify, says Porter. Well, the judge agrees with the state in saying, well, your Fifth Amendment right not to testify is not implicated because none of what you say is going to be used against you because they're offering you immunity. But that, in my view, presents a big legal quagmire for a couple of reasons. The first, there's also a federal investigation underway, and to what extent can the state court bind the federal government in the event that Porter is brought in and charged with a federal crime? I mean, states are their own sovereignty, but they don't dictate to the federal government what you do. Now, there's cases suggesting that if states offer immunity, then it will be recognized by the federal government, but it's far from what we call controlling and settled law. So why should I have to testify if the federal government should prosecute me still? And also as a practical matter, let's look at the ethics. When Porter testified in his case, the prosecutor essentially called him a liar 24 times. So wait a minute. Let me get this straight. Porter testifies in his own trial saying he told Goodson that Freddie Gray was ill. He testifies he told Sergeant White that Freddie Gray was ill. He testifies to a variety of other things. You as a prosecutor call him a liar 24 times, but now this liar that you called in his case, you want to use in your case because he wasn't lying to say that he did the same thing he told you he did in his trial. It doesn't make sense. So from an ethical perspective, you have a prosecutor who berated a witness in cross-examination, who called them a liar on cross-examination, who wants to put them on the stand in their case to say, well, he was lying in his case, but he's being truthful now, ladies and gentlemen, so let him testify, and I want you to believe him, by the way, because Goodson knew and didn't do anything. So it raises a lot of issues in my mind, and I just think that a defendant who has a trial pending shouldn't be put in a position of having to say anything. And so, I would be very interested in seeing what the Special Court of Appeals has to say once they evaluate the case and they take up the appeal of the defendant because, the right to a fair trial is something that's jealously guarded by the Constitution. And the right for a defendant not to incriminate themselves is something also jealously guarded. And if you're a prosecutor, you can't, for your limited purpose, have them testify, but say, whatever you say today, we're not going to use. But what you said last time in your case, we can use. It just really muddles the waters. And again, as was said, it's a very unsettled issue in Maryland and elsewhere. And so I think we should stay tuned on the resolution of whether he actually does, that is Porter, take the stand against Goodson and later, subsequent to the Goodson case, against Sergeant White, who's also facing trial.
Very interesting indeed, and let's waive that last story because we have some callers that want to say hello to you, if that's cool with you.
Absolutely.
Let's go out to California, Huntington Beach to be exact. Sarah Kardashian's on the phone. Good evening, Sarah. You're live with Joey Jackson. Thought, question.
Well, good evening, Jordan, and good evening, Joey. I know you're short tonight, so I'll keep it brief. I think the most crucial thing and topic tonight and all week has been fair trials. And if anybody watched Making a Murderer, it is unbelievable how some people really don't get fair trials. But I'm not giving an opinion for guilt, nor am I saying not guilty for that case. I am not saying guilty or not guilty for Bill Cosby either, but he does deserve a fair trial because everyone is innocent until proven guilty. And my question about Bill Cosby is, I think last week there was talk about Mrs. Cosby being deposed. And